Chapter 35, Section 2. It is election time, the election of 1984. Now, in this election, you're going to have the Republicans going with Reagan again. Vice President George H.W. Bush for VP. Reagan is going to be helped out in this election by some military action that took place in Grenada in 1983. In Grenada, there was a coup where the rebels are going to kill the prime minister and take over this small, tiny Caribbean island of Grenada. And some of the neighbors in the area, other Caribbean nations, asked us to help restore order in Grenada. They didn't want this revolution idea spreading. So on October 25th, 1983, you're going to have several thousand Marines and Army Rangers arrive in Grenada. The coup leaders are removed. You're going to have a government set up. It favors us, obviously. And it went flawlessly. American confidence in the military was starting to increase. The Democrats are going to nominate Walter Mondale and Geraldine Ferraro. Geraldine Ferraro is the first woman to run on a major party's ticket. And the Republicans are going to win 525, the most electoral votes any electoral candidate has ever received, to 13. Landslide. All right. Going into Reagan's second term here, you're going to see some frustrations over problems in the Middle East and in Latin America, with the Iran thing, with the El Salvador and Nicaragua, with the Sandinistas and Contra thing. And remember, with all this frustration, with all this worry about another Vietnam, Congress had cut off the funding to fight against the Sandinistas. Okay, because remember, the Boland Amendment said no helping the Contras. And this leaves the Reagan administration looking for other sources of funding. Now, at the same time as all this was going on, there were some U.S. hostages being held in Lebanon. They are being held in Lebanon by a pro-Iranian group. And we're going to bargain for the hostages' release with the agreement that we would sell and ship more than 500 anti-tank missiles through Israel to Iran. Hostages are released. We sell these anti-tank missiles to Iran, funneling it through Israel to kind of cover our tracks. And now all of a sudden, we have money that's off the books that nobody knows about. We're going to secretly use that profit from the arms sales to help out the Contras. We're helping the Contras buy weapons and supplies to fight against the Sandinistas. Again, this was all illegal. Congress had banned us from doing this type of thing. In 1986, the arms sales become public. It becomes public that we sold weapons to Iran. And Reagan is going to appoint a commission to investigate. The commission clears Reagan of any direct involvement, but there were other White House officials that are going to be criticized, and some resign as a result. Once they find out we sold these weapons, it's only a matter of time before they start looking into where'd the money go, following that money trail. And so they then find out that we funded the Contras with that money, which brings us to Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, a White House aide. He was the one responsible for funneling that money from Iran to the Contras, despite the fact that Congress had banned that. And in 87, the Senate and the House are investigating, and North is called in and questioned, and he admits that he destroyed documents and covered this up. But he said that he acted out of patriotism. The Senate denounced what North had done. The Senate criticized the White House for letting this happen right under their nose. And in 1988, criminal charges will be filed against Oliver North and the National Security Advisor. And they'll be convicted on all charges. Although the conviction will be reversed on a legal technicality. They had violated North's Fifth Amendment rights, self-incrimination. All right, let's talk about easing these Cold War tensions, because obviously they're not at a good point at this time. In 1985, the Soviet Union is going to get a new leader. The new leader is Mikhail Gorbachev. And Gorbachev is going to inherit a Soviet Union that's just full of problems. You know, their economy is failing. They have a repressive political system. You're dealing with heavy military costs. I mean, all sorts of issues in the Soviet Union that if they're going to survive, if they're going to succeed, maybe even win, they got to solve these problems. One of Gorbachev's ideas was called Glasnost, which was a policy of openness that promised more freedom for the Soviet people. Another plan that he had was called Perestroika. Perestroika was the plan to restructure the Soviet economy and government. And the way they were going to do that was increasing foreign trade, reducing the amount of money they're spending on the military, and modernizing their factories. It looks for the first time since the Bolshevik Revolution that maybe the leaders of the Soviet Union seem open to capitalism, maybe even democracy. Because a lot of the criticism of the Soviet Union was coming from the Soviet people themselves, not just us. And in 1987, you're going to have the INF Treaty, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, signed by Reagan and Gorbachev, eliminating all medium-range nuclear weapons from Europe. And it also included a provision about the Soviet Union withdrawing from Afghanistan, which was referred to by some as the Soviets' Vietnam, as they had gotten in there and couldn't quite figure out how to win or get out. Chapter 35, Section 3, we'll start just a little bit of it here. I want to cover the election of 1988. The election of 88. Big thing here is there's no Reagan. Reagan had already served his 2 terms. The Democrats look at this and hope this is their chance. They had not performed well in the elections against Reagan. And the Democrats are going to be deciding between Jesse Jackson and Michael Dukakis. And Jackson comes out and wants what he called a rainbow coalition of support. Support from all races, classes, and creeds of people. Michael Dukakis wins the nomination of the Democrats, and his VP candidate was Lloyd Bentsen. The Republicans are going to go with George H.W. Bush, Reagan's vice president, and his VP candidate is going to be Dan Quayle. And there are some interesting stories about Dan Quayle. Google sometime Dan Quayle and spelling potato, because he misspelled it at a elementary school spelling bee thing. This election is going to be harsh. The Republicans use very critical ads against Dukakis, talking about how Dukakis was easy on crime, weak on protecting the environment. They had one ad talking about when Dukakis was governor, he had weekend passes for convicted convicts where they could get out of prison for the weekend. And one of the guys got out of prison and murdered some people, a family or something like that. And the Republicans put out an ad talking about, is this the guy you want? And the Democrats were very slow to defend themselves. And when you're accused of something and you don't have a defense, people start thinking, holy cow, it's true. Bush wins 426 to 111, but the Democrats are going to hold the majority in Congress.